The Miami Grand Prix of 2022 was a welcoming sight for a lot of people, trying to take their minds off the continuing demise of Ferrari, as Mattia Binotto single-handedly destroyed the pride of Italy. It was a Grand Prix symbolic of Formula One's expansion in the United States. Having tried so hard in the past to make the sport a thing in the land of the free, they finally cracked it, with spectacular glitz and glamour in a location so tantalizing for onlookers that they were ready to sell their families to be able to even get a general admission ticket. To seasoned F1 fans who still call Aston Martin Jordan, Drive to Survive may be the bane of their existence, but it in no small way helped make this weekend a possibility. It did indeed seem to be the perfect beginning to the Formula One American dream thing, but don't for one second think that the Miami Grand Prix and everything about it was perfect. In fact, it was as straightforward as an approach into Kai Tak Airport. And perhaps that's not the greatest of omens, considering as of the recording of this video, the 2023 Miami Grand Prix had not yet sold out, and Kai Tak Airport is very much dead. This event did have a little bit of trouble getting off the ground, and yeah, you guessed it right, we're gonna take a deep dive in at the very beginning of it all. Back in the 1980s, skyscrapers were popping up everywhere around Miami as cocaine money needed a place to go. Not that this man had anything to do with that, but Ralph Sanchez was a well-established promoter of racing events and figured that a race on the streets of Miami would do wonders for the image of the city. He reasoned that the high populace of Latin Americans in the state would be drawn to the sport, although whether this mathed out in reality, I'm not so certain. It was first run in 1983 with IMSA, the American Sports Car Championship that played host to plenty of drug smugglers in this time, making this whole event wildly appropriate. The event was held on the harborfront of Miami in Bicentennial Park, but while you can't fault Sanchez for his enthusiasm and love of racing, he might have prayed to the wrong god, because come race day, every drop of water in the Gulf of Mexico was dumped upon the circuit, creating some lousy track conditions and an even lousier viewing experience for the 14 spectators that showed up on that day. The race was culled after only a sixth of the distance was covered, and Sanchez ended up losing $1.3 million when all was said and done. You can feel the pain on that one, but because, even though he wasn't obliged to, he dug into his own pocket to fulfill the contractual obligations, he earned the respect of the motorsport community. And hey, teething troubles are part and parcel of any great racing event. You gotta take the good from the bad and move on. Use it to create a better version of yourself. And Sanchez did just that. Throughout the 80s, he made the race into a marquee event on the IMSA calendar. He also attracted the indie racing scene to the city, though this only lasted for a few years. Then it came back in 1995. Then it went away again. Then it came back in 2002. And then it went away again. They were flirting with the idea of open wheel racing in the city of Miami, with there even being discussions that they could lure the granddaddy of them all, Formula One. But, like a lot of proposals put in front of Bernie Ecclestone for a potential race, it was shafted away so there was enough room on the table for his underground poker match. Fast forward a couple recessions later, and we arrive at 2015. Formula E pitched their tent on the waterfront. Interest very slowly began to rear its head again, and then when Liberty Media acquired Formula One and bought that sports marketing out of the Stone Age, Miami was listed as one of the cities as part of their grand master plan of making Formula One big in America once and for all. The idea was for it to be held on the bayfront, just like the earlier races were. Apex Circuit Designs was drafted in to conceive a layout for the circuit, and when it came out, the general reaction was, that's it? Despite the spectacular concept of racing across a bridge, the rest of that track appeared to be a mishmash of that'll do. That might be appropriate in surgery, but not in circuit design, goddammit. Best way to sum it up is by what a Formula One driver had to say about it.
Miami is a super cool place, and I was very excited to hear about it. But when I saw the layout, I was like, meh. I think it could be a lot more fun. I don't get why, for example, in golf, all the great golfers design golf courses. You have not got any of the top racing drivers in history having ever designed a racetrack, and I don't get it. Not that any of us are designers, but they haven't asked for our input.
The driver who said that? Sir Lewis Hamilton. And yes, his opinion does matter quite a lot. But if they thought the disapproval of Lewis was a bad thing, they were about to draw the ire of an even bigger enemy. The Biscayne Neighborhoods Association. They admonished organizers for their lack of communication and claimed that the race would only be a financial burden onto them rather than a benefit. People began to protest against the race, and soon the organizers and Formula One found themselves backed into a corner where the track was hated by the people who were meant to drive it, and hated even more by those meant to watch people who hated driving on it. Despite multiple revisions to that circuit, it was no use. It wasn't loved, the construction for certain sections of track and pit facilities were not looking to be on schedule, and it was throwing them in a courthouse much too often. They needed a new plan. And luckily, one of the event backers was Stephen M. Ross, who owned the Miami Dolphins of the National Football League, who played at Hard Rock Stadium up in the Gardens, which he also owned, which had a pretty big parking lot. To some, the idea of an American F1 race being held in a parking lot brought back a lot of memories. None of them any good. Apex Designs was drafted in once again, and given the stretch of land available, they were able to come up with 75 designs for the 2B Grand Prix track. And of all of them, this was the one that they settled on. And I know what you're thinking. That ain't the one they race on nowadays? And you'd be right. It isn't. Sections of 199th Street were used to make this track, but after meetings with the locals, it was clear that this wasn't going to work. The track underwent multiple revisions before arriving at the one that we know of today. Maybe it was better than the original design, maybe it wasn't, but at least they had something. To appease the locals, a deal brokered between Ross and Mayor Rodney Harris would see $5 million in funding for the city's residents and businesses over a period of 10 years. There would also be noise mitigation barriers put up, air quality monitoring put in place, and a STEM program set up to offer paid internships for high school and college students. In April 2021, the deal to host the race was approved by local commissioners, and now the Miami Grand Prix, after years of trouble trying to get it up and running, would finally be running. But of course, it didn't end there. In a land where lawsuits are allowed to roam free and embody what it means to be an American, the Miami Grand Prix organizers were surely bound to run into one once people caught wind of a billionaire coming into even more money. Heading into 2022, the year of the first race, residents continued to protest against it. They claimed that the F1 cars would emanate enough noise to create hearing loss, which is kind of unlikely nowadays, but they also claimed the noise would violate the city's noise ordinance. However, obviously, the legal system ruled in favor of the Grand Prix organizers, and the race would go ahead. We would finally have the Miami Grand Prix, the first F1 race in Florida since 1959, and the first time two American Grand Prix were in a calendar year since 1984. I think, if memory serves me right, all the issues in the rearview mirror, nothing to worry about from their perspective. For us, however, the peasants, we had a slightly different view of things, because while the concept of attending a race in Miami sounded awesome, the prices attached to literally everything surrounding this event meant that pulling the usual trick of selling your family wasn't going to cut it. You want a general admission ticket for the 3 days? That'll cost you around $600. You want parking passes? That's $150. You want grandstand tickets? Forget about that, bro. And then factor in accommodation, knowing that the local hotel owners have tapped into the fact that 65,000 people aren't going to want to walk more than a block after a day in the sun. Almost immediately, this race gained a reputation for being incredibly overpriced. Even if somehow you were able to fraud your way into this event, you would then be rubbing shoulders with people who were there primarily for clout, were there simply because they could afford it, a status symbol, or whatever it is that makes them feel important. Having said that, Monaco ain't much better. The organizers were able to charge these prices because they could. People there were also lamenting the lack of amenities, lack of shade, and the overpriced food and drink. And that's a problem, because the last time an event held on flat ground had overpriced water bottles and no shade, 200,000 sweaty Limp Bizkit fans ended up causing a riot. However, for 2023, they looked at the overly high prices and thought, let's raise them from eye-watering to straight-up cruelty. To put this in perspective, a 4-day GA ticket for the Australian Grand Prix is around $165, and there you get Formula 2, Formula 3, V8 supercars, and Beatles. For the Miami Grand Prix in 2023, a 3-day GA ticket would land at $600, and that's before you start getting into the grandstand prices, or the prices for the boat in the marina with the fake water, which, if you're wondering, is selling for $4,500 a pop, which, you know, chump change. And heading into the weekend, they were struggling to fill those seats. To be totally fair, they did add 3,000 seats compared to last year, and that last year was a sellout, with the tickets being an ultra high demand. But when you're starting to dish out bargain coupons, slashing ticket prices by $250, you know something's bad. So it was far from an easy berth. But as we know from the first of the city street circuits back in 1983, teething troubles are always going to be there. It is kind of part and parcel of these kinds of events. F1 are trying to establish this as a marquee event on the calendar, which, I mean, good luck to them. Street circuits in America do have a very short lifespan. Whether this meets the same fate remains to be seen. But when you look at this event and everything around it, when you ignore all the little things that might annoy you, it genuinely does look like a freaking cool race to go to. I don't know, does that make me a hypocrite? Yeah, whatever.